Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. We have back with us today meteorologist Greg Soulje. You may remember Greg from being with us on past 365 segments, or perhaps you've caught Greg's weather forecast on This Week in Agribusiness on RFD TV and other stations across the nation. So, welcome, Greg. Great to have you back with us today.
Well, nice to be with you there, Sarah. Good day to you, and Happy New Year, by the way, on kind of a new and somewhat ugly weather pattern across parts of the country here today.
And you told us this was going to happen,
Yeah,
but
I know where you're going.
We're still going to blame you for it, but you did
That's
tell us
okay.
this was going to happen. For those of you that are joining us, I want to remind you that you can certainly put your questions for Greg there in the chat. If you're joining us from social media, you can also post those right there in the chat area on your screen. So, as I mentioned, you did kind of warn us, Greg, but we're ready for some warm weather, and I think we're going to mention a little bit of that here later today. But first, my question for you, as a weather guy, and we're in this really harsh time now with a lot of cold and
Yeah.
snow and just really not nice conditions out there. So is everybody then your friend, and they want to know when this is going to end, or is everybody point their finger and go, "Oh, you are a bad person"? What kind of response do you get out there?
There's a line that law enforcement use, and I learned this from Earl Finkel, a gentleman who kind of really pioneered this along with Orion and Max. It's like, I'm here to protect and serve. So that usually gets people off my back about it, but I can understand it. I mean, especially when, for this month of December, the start of wintertime, it was anything but wintertime. Particularly through the plains and the Corn Belt locales. And then as we say, and you guys, I'm sure, say it in the livestock side, the other boot end or hoof dropped big time on us here. So, but yeah, people, their weather drives everything, whether you're in the producer side of it, agribusiness, just getting around, folks in rural America, more urban areas, folks in the bus stop, whatever, you're impacted by weather. And when it is of a headline making nature or it cuts into the bottom line, you certainly hear about it. But that's just the nature of the game. I've told people for the years I've been doing this, not only to the meteorology curriculum there ought to be something for psychology involved in having to deal with and handle this. But, it's part of the business. Everyone, and in probably every other field, has to put up with some sense of commentary once in a while.
Well, good point. Good point. But we're seeing snow down in, I think, Texas is where I
Yeah.
saw some here this week. So really some odd things going on out there. So let's talk. I mentioned Texas. Let's talk a little bit about the drought. I think you've got some drought maps to start us off with here today.
Yeah, but I tell you, there was snow as far south as Houston, and hard freeze all the way down to Louisiana, sugar cane, but they're obviously done with harvest operations there. There'll be a frost and freeze all the way down into perhaps Mickey's place in Florida. Not to mention they had, I think, 5 inches of snow at Memphis, Tennessee, and are down around the Chattanooga area. So, but the way I look at it, and hopefully you folks down there as well, when you see these orange and shades of red through Texas and Bayou country to the Tennessee Valley, this particular corridor, well, that's certainly significant, severe, extreme to exceptional drought conditions. So look at it as drought relief. And that is still where the worst of the drought continues on here. We keep track of this even in the wintertime season, still lingering in parts of the southern Corn Belt, the worst still, despite the 15 inches of snow around Coralville last week. That is, by the way, a heavy water equivalent to type snow. We'll take a look at the snow cover map here in just a bit, but there should be additional drought relief, and we do keep track of that. It is meaningful in the wintertime season, and you see that through Iowa, parts of the upper Midwest. Little change in the southwestern sections of the country, and Sarah, still little, if any, significant drought across California, but snowpack, snow total, accumulating snow has been very much disappointing this wintertime season this year. I believe it is about, the water equivalency is less than 4 inches. It should be about a foot when you melt on all the snow in the Sierra. So they're already kind of hankering about some runoff prospect issues in California. Now, this is a government forecast. This came out at the end of December. Just a quick quick snapshot of the seasonal drought outlook, and it's kind of off right now because it's not really right. And this is the Fed's approach to it. We obviously agree and have seen some improvement here through the lower Mississippi Valley and Delta region. There's been no moisture or no improvement to the dryness and drought or eradication of it in the southwestern sections of the country. There probably will be some improvement, but they're forecasting worsening in the western Corn Belt locales. And here the next week to 10 days to 2 weeks, there should be significant improvement, not worsening, in the eastern and southern Corn Belt locales. So this is just, I'm an equal opportunity weather forecaster here. That's what the government folks were certainly thinking. Hey, let's take a look at the upper air configuration here. And yeah, the weather forecasters, the weather people love talking this stuff. And I know a lot of green spaghetti lines here, but just remember weather moves west to east. And what it does signify, instead of those jet stream winds coming out of the Arctic Circle and the polar regions, they are west to east. These green lines are kind of going west to east. They buckle and ripple here and there, but by the time you get to the 23rd of January, approaching the last week of January, they come up right out of the Gulf Coast and the southern states. So that tells us, yeah, there are some milder days ahead. I necessarily like to use the word warmer because a lot of times there's complications because of cloud cover, dampness, higher humidity, higher dew points. That's not the greatest for livestock. You need more feed, ground softens, snow melts. There's footing issues for livestock operations and folks who monitor those bin and barn storage facilities. You got to take into account, well, we were 20 below or 30 below, or in Montana, they were 44 below zero the past couple of mornings, actual air temperatures. Now we're going to go back in the other direction. So that's stuff you need to watch out for and monitor accordingly. So there's one more slug of cold here, just on a quick look here towards Friday and Saturday in these panels right here. High pressure, you'll be looking at readings down close to zero all the way to the southern Corn Belt locales, but around the high, the flow is clockwise, and so winds come out of the Gulf. That's as Earl used to say, and we say in the weather business, so this time of the year, the winds are correct. They're coming out of the south, but the packing of these red lines means they'll be pretty gusty and stout out there. So again, I hate using the word warmer sometimes in wintertime, milder. The cold moderates, more seasonal temperatures, that type of thing. But there's also a bunch of Gulf moisture working on up between about the 23rd and in the last week of the month of January. So, Sarah, a milder, a more moderate weather pattern, but it will be loaded up with a fair amount of moisture and a lot of moisture. I'm sure you see this chart here. Look at it through California. Good news there. The Pacific Northwest as well. That part of the country is still with ongoing dryness and drought through Washington State. But look at the shades and hues of purple and reds down here through Texas. That is a lot of moisture. So you went from ice and snow to Galveston to Houston to what may be a significant rain, and those rains are northbound. So melting snow, softening grounds, frost and freeze back out of the grounds. What else is there? Dampness, high humidity, muddy conditions, the whole 9 yards. But one caveat to liquid moisture this time of the year: when it overruns these cold-soaked and snow-covered grounds, the onset can be sometimes freezing rain or freezing drizzle or some sleet. So the good, bad, and ugly with this type of scenario here, with pretty good fetch of moisture all the way up into the Corn Belt locales. And again, drought improvement. That's another way to look at it across the country. And I think something that I haven't really heard much about of late the past few weeks is really see if we can begin to get some of these rivers, while they're probably in ice jamming effect. I know that's going on in the Kankakee River Basin right now. We're going to go into ice jam mode there again, but maybe some opportunity to get some moisture into these streams and rivers via a runoff, maybe not all at once, but maybe the combination of melting snow and some rainfall here in the coming 7 to 10 days will certainly help out with that.
So what are we looking at in terms of all this snow that we've had? You talked about maybe some snow cover discussion.
Yes, exactly. And matter of fact, here's sort of just an analysis of where there's at least an inch or more of snow on the ground. Of course, what jumps right back at you there is snow on the ground from Texarkana down to just about the Rio Grande. They were in the upper teens there, Sarah, a couple of mornings ago. They had low 20s outside of Galveston, and Houston had at least a little accretion of some ice and some freezing rain down there. And of course, the snow all the way to the Tennessee Valley, Mid-Atlantic region. I'll tell you, this eastern part of the country, not a lot of ag. You get into the spring spring season. I always hear from the maple syrup guys out of Vermont that I'm not talking about it enough, but they've gone from snowstorms to floods to flooding rain, back to snow. So there's a perspective of snow cover across the country. What is probably more significant is this next panel. Might be tough to pick up, but you can see these deeper hues. Here's the key down here of what we call the water equivalency. If you were to take that column of snow, melt it down, there's your essentially, give or take, your rainfall that you would have come out of it. Not a perfect scenario, but there is basically a lot of moisture in that snow over in eastern and northeastern Nebraska, eastern Iowa, north Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and through Michigan. And this is a wet consistency type snow, so there should be some modest soil improvement down through the Tennessee Valley. But there's probably at least an inch or two of water sitting in that snow cover, which started off wet, then it went to that powdery stuff, and then we'll put rain on top of that. So, Sarah, the specter of some sloppy ground, some extra feet requirements, a slow go on the rural routes. But more importantly, for folks who, like me, after January 15th, I got no use for wintertime, you can melt the snow away. And it does serve a purpose. So, winter wheat fields and pasture lands, but there's a fair amount of snow. Like I said, about 55% of the country now has snow. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was less than 20%. So again, some inroads into snow cover and snowpack, but this will be a benefit when if we can, I think we will slowly bring it down and melt it down with not a real deep layer of frost in the ground. So this should be a general drought improvement situation as it applies to especially the Western Corn Belt locales.
Well, that's really good news. Yeah, we might see that Iowa drought area become a little less red. I mean,
yes, a little less dominant. I know, there's no field work going on, but you want to really hit the ground, come springtime around here in good shape with soil moisture levels.
Exactly. So what else are we looking at here, Greg?
Well, down the line here, again, back to the squiggly lines and the dashed lines, and people think, how in the world you guys are forecasting? In any event, the red dashed areas meaning the atmosphere is generally warmer than average. We'll just put it that way. You can break it down into a different discussion. Here are your green squiggly lines again, and they kind of buckle over the southwest. They ride north and northeast. This is called a trough. East of the trough, unsettled weather, but again, they are oriented from southwest to northeast. Over the past couple of weeks, they have been literally out of the polar region, Northwest Territories of Canada, I think up around the Yukon. New Year's Day, they had an actual temperature of 52 degrees below zero. But again, it's more of a west to east orientation or southwest to northeast. So over the next 6 to 10 days, milder weather, less cold, and comes at a price, limited sunshine, a lot of cloud cover, higher humidity, dampness, et cetera, so forth and so on. But what we call stratospheric warming, well, the stratosphere turning back to colder now. Anytime the stratosphere is a layer above the main layer of the atmosphere that pushes the weather through. It's called the troposphere. The next layer above that is the stratosphere. If you want to know where the northern lights come from, it's up in the ionosphere. In any event, basically we're going back to, like we said, a little more typical traditional moderate to strong El Nino weather pattern. That trough does move a little bit east in the 8 to 14 day outlook. That takes us to just about the end part of January. But again, the flow kind of west to east. Nothing right now in the medium range that we're going to get back into this Arctic air. So good news. And we talked about this on our last session back in November. El Nino doesn't mean you're not going to get cold outbreaks. You're not going to get into Arctic air. You're not going to get snow. You're not going to get ice. It's just a lot less of it dependent on the strength of the El Nino pattern. And it remains very much a moderate to strong one across North America. So this is the Fed's outlook, the 6 to 10 day outlook, and they generally have pretty good consistency and runs on these things, at least of late. There are sometimes these model runs are what we call, they become outlier. They're outside of the plotting of an average or a mean, but this looks to be pretty consistent around here with generally readings that are normally in the teens, 20s, and 30s, let's say from the Great Lakes to the Central Plains. They will run probably 5, 10, maybe 15 degrees above average, especially at night with the cloud cover. So there's no Arctic air in sight, fairly comfortable days, mild nights relative to the end portion of January and just about the beginning part of February. Look at this moisture pattern, and that's that U-shaped trough, that configuration, and jet stream winds, upper level winds, all winds for that matter, are going to come in directly into the Pacific. and onshore flows. So we finally get back into what we ought to expect for a typical El Nino setup in California, the southwestern part of the country. This has been a very anemic moisture pattern this winter season. And here we go with some drought improvement in places that the Fed's were really thinking on, this is not going to happen. But we've been pretty consistent, we think, on the TV show that I know it's wintertime, but we're going to get our moisture, and we'll get it for Texas into the Ohio Valley and sections of the Ozarks and Ohio Valley. And really no significant change going out 8 to 14 days. There is the mild air. That's probably about 10 to 15 above average. That's 20s by day, teens at night. The upper Midwest, northern Great Lakes region, thaw freeze cycles, not great with heavy equipment usage and footing for livestock and workers out there, but you're not layered up from head to toe. And here is the moisture pattern. And despite, all the oranges and reds there, Sarah, sometimes the atmosphere we're in basically our climatologically coldest time of the year. The atmosphere is going to hold a lot of moisture. So there will be a tendency for snow and wet packing type snow and high moisture content snow in areas of Kansas, maybe parts of the Corn Belt as well. So we may bring the snow down, we'll bring the snow back. And again, the propensity to have some of that mixed freezing moisture as well, freezing fog, every possible sense of moisture in the atmosphere will probably get condensed out as we move on through the end part of January and the beginning part of February. So that's the perspective. Ready for what the guy from This Week in Agribusiness is talking about here in the weeks to come?
Yeah, we're ready, and of course, a lot of us that are on this session are looking at Atlanta for our big IPPE show that's coming up at the end of the month, and then Orlando for our big cattle show that's coming up at the end of the month after that. So our eyes are down in that little area down there. Those of us who have to travel.
I think we're done with winter for now in that part of the country. It was a rude awakening down there the past few days. So we'll go right back in the other direction. But, with an El Nino setup, and it was prior to the cold and the snow, you had multiple rounds of severe weather in the southeastern states, Atlanta, Orlando, up and down the eastern seaboard. Of course, some of that catastrophic flooding in the eastern states. We're not out of the woods with that. So it kind of takes on a different character heading through from mid-January to mid-February. Here's our outlook, the remainder of winter, as we have talked about and discussed it over the New Year's holiday on This Week in Agribusiness. So the cold air remains bottled up. We think some little pieces of it will break loose and hover through the northern Great Lakes up towards the Sioux. It's a very strong 150, 160 mile an hour jet stream out of the Pacific Northwest for the Ohio Valley. So pretty mild. This is all Pacific air, not warm per se, except maybe in the southern states. Mild nights, comfortable days, not bad for just about the mid to late stretch of wintertime. No shortage of moisture, at least in this particular part of the country. It's stormy in the Pacific Northwest. We'll get these systems again, much like we have the past couple of go-arounds. They'll swing through the Ohio Valley up the eastern states. They'll get into some pretty good winder-uppers, but absent will be any Arctic air, but nonetheless, still some probably healthy snows for the Great Lakes, northern and eastern Corn Belt locales, probably a rain-snow mix and significant moisture. This part of the country, we've got to keep an eye on the southern branch of the jet for severe weather and more flooding issues, I think, up and down the eastern seaboard. Meanwhile, normal to above in a drought year, we'll take it across the plains. And again, this is a little more disappointing. So that's why, at least in the short term, heading through at least the beginning part of February, any of that moisture in California is of great benefit and significance. If we take things for at least between mid-February and mid-March through what we base our longer range, we start the season sometimes, for example, meteorological winter December 1st, meteorological spring March 1st. We'll take it to the 20 or 21st of March for springtime, the start of which. And look at the warmth, mild air for California, much of the central and southern plains down through Texas. That'll hopefully the weather guy will really be able to amend the issues he served up down there with the cold and the frost and the freeze and the snow the past week to 10 days there. Still some cold air over the northeastern part of the country, but nothing harsh, nothing unusual. Still, you get the picture more or less a west to east upper pattern. So it's still stormy in the Pacific Northwest. There's late season snows, but more in line with additional maybe stream and river rises if we can get an easy snowmelt season going. And this is late in the season. They'll probably just what we see right now, a nominal normal flood season across the Red River Valley of the north up here. So that's good news. Big sugar beet part of the country as well. And the weather pattern still stormy for the Great Lakes region up and down the eastern seaboard as well. So Sarah, at least through the rest of wintertime around here, it's easy to take on temperatures. There should be no shortage of moisture. Not that there won't be winter storms, not that there won't be, severe, at least snowfall, but it's moisture. I like to use a term a lot of times on the radio. It's a manageable storm. What do you expect in February and March? It does snow. If we can stay away from the harsh cold, add some moisture out there, all the while better.
So it sounds like, all things considered, we're setting up pretty good for spring and
Yes.
getting back in those fields. We should have adequate moisture in many areas. Shouldn't have tons of snow that we have to work through. The ground shouldn't be, it should be thawed out pretty quickly. So
Yes.
the mud, of course, is always the issue, and how
Yes.
quickly. But it sounds like we're in fairly good shape from this point looking forward.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and especially over the southern states where we like to mark the calendar, typically, they start to get things maybe a little rolling around the 1st to the 15th of February. And as we put it out in the southern states, there'll be moisture, a wetter scenario, over the eastern end of cotton country, a little drier in through Texas. But over the next couple of 2.5 weeks, there ought to be some significant moisture there. So we think it'll be a good start to the spring season over the southern states, as well as parts of the central and southern plains, even the southern Corn Belt locales. Now, this is an early spring perspective here. If you were to kind of average out the dates, let's just say mid-March to mid-April, we're just kind of getting things going. I always hear of someone out there by the 10th or 15th of March putting corn in the ground somewhere in central Illinois. I don't know what the thing is, but maybe it's the first of the race, I guess. I don't know. But in any event, this is a pretty acceptable setup. This is a pretty much normal, typical upper air configuration and a layout of temperatures for early spring. It's a weakening El Nino. We think that process will get going over the course of April, May, and June. It's not like throwing a light switch and all of a sudden we're back to a neutral state atmosphere. It takes a while for the atmosphere to catch on up. And if you kind of read through, we've got this through at least as mid-spring, I believe, here. And we talked about it on the TV show. I'm actually going to be in Central Illinois February 6th at the Illini FS annual meeting. I don't really have any big headlines for the spring planting season. Yeah, you'll get a delay here and there. You may have a shutdown for a few days here and there, but I think the general net will be normal, maybe even a little above on soil moisture, at least back to normal in some of the worst drought areas. And temperatures that will be pretty much where you would expect them for the time of year. Usual oscillation back and forth, usual spring setup. In any event, here's the temperature outlook for early spring. You see that pretty much a clear cut. So a little bit of a trough pattern through the middle part of the country. The weather scenario is down through areas of the south end of winter wheat breaking dormancy. That's okay, I guess. Down through parts of the cotton country, deep south and southeastern part of the country. And this time of the year, when you're this area south of the jet stream in the southern states, the spring warmth is trying to get going. It's more or less these clusters, these outbreaks of showers and thunderstorms. So you get windows in between the rainfall. It is the severe weather season down there, mind you. But farther to the north, nothing too excessive, out of control with maybe any early season spring work, field work. There'll be some snow melt and additional moisture too for the upper Midwest, normalized there, a little drier through the Great Lakes region. So this is really the corridor of active weather. And if you wanted some trouble spots, it'd be probably here over the far east end of cotton country. Everyone else, especially here, ought to be looking at some drought relief on the scene for with outdoor work in mind. So some good news there. Now, the mid-spring outlook continues to feature a weakening, slowly El Nino weather pattern. 4 to 6 months is usually the time frame to move out of an El Nino or move in or out of a La Nina setup on average. Shorter, quicker, typically in the summertime when it happens, a little longer as you get into the range of seasons as in spring to winter or from fall to winter. In any event, here is still so much colder than average weather that we think the greatest snowpack down the line and cold highs tend to migrate over that will be over the Hudson Bay, James Bay, St. Lawrence River Valley area here, and then warmth over California down through the Gulf Coast. This is pretty much much close to, at least as it applies to the upper air pattern, a normal upper air pattern for mid-spring. Let's say April to mid-May around here. So yeah, temperatures about normal. Your usual oscillations back and forth. Soil readings are going to inch back close to seasonal norms. Any real heat, probably the Gulf Coast. No sign of the hot ridge even at this point in California or the southwestern sections of the country either. Then finally, to wrap it up here, there's the moisture pattern. Normalized, typical, mid-spring. We can deal with that. Remember now, sometimes in the Midwest and parts of the plains, an average normal week of rain is about 3/4 to maybe a little bit north of a buck of rain. So, you're going to have some delays from time to time, but this is good news considering we think we should be pretty close to eradicating, not maybe completely, but eradicating and starting the season out. And Sarah, you made a great point of the field work season in good order, ending the dryness and drought there. A little wetter eastern Corn Belt. Again, I think the eastern states and the southeastern states are going to be the more problematic areas. It's going to be tough if we can't get something through by mid to late May. That's the usual rule of thumb, the 15th to the 20th of May in the central and southern winter wheat belt. The climate takes on more of a Mediterranean hot, errant thunderstorm, spotty moisture scenario. So we'll keep an eye on that. Nothing going on across California. We don't have, at least we're not confident in our thinking of late spring. So we will include that in our next get together in February. But Sarah, it does look like that probably just a more normalized moisture pattern for late spring, maybe trending a little wetter back in the eastern Corn Belt, but I still did not see any headlines, anything glaring at me of any concerns about either too dry or too wet or widespread field work delays or widespread replanting. The past several years, we've had that in some parts of the Corn Belt. In the western, especially the southwestern section of Missouri comes to mind, and some of the areas in the Ohio Valley. So we'll have the late spring and early summer outlook maybe as we get together in the month of February. But that is pretty much what our thinking is. You can see some dryness over the southwestern part of the country, wet here. It's still kind of a northwest to southeast jet stream pattern. And again, more normalized moisture for the northern and central plains, much of the Corn Belt locale. So nothing for now that's going to jump out and say, hey, we've got more dryness and drought, or hey, plan your seed to purchase accordingly for having it sit in too much water for too long of a time. So that is our thinking going forward here in the days and weeks and months to come.
Very good. And it sounds like we might be setting up for some pretty good pasture conditions as well.
Yes, exactly. I would think that, we're in such a multi-year drought pattern in some of those central and southern plains areas. I think just one season, and we've seen that already, is not going to see and show a significant improvement. Now, mind you, Kansas has had improvement. I think in the shorter term of it all, there should continue to be, at least in those central and eastern winter wheat areas and pasture land regions on south, roughly Oklahoma City on east and north. Okay, you get down to the Metroplex, Dallas, Fort Worth, back to cotton country. With time, I think that'll be a worsening scenario. So generally, probably one of our better, not best, but one of our better starts to the maybe livestock raising season and winter wheat season on the central and southern plains going forward.
Very good. All right. Well, sounds like we survived the 1 week of really nasty winter this year.
Yeah, I tell you, it's like I said, by about the 15th, I've and I've been doing this for quite a while, and actually I do like winter storms. I don't have much of a use for winter these days, so I don't know if it's the number by my name these days or what have you. But hopefully everyone made it through okay, especially those southern states. Boy, I tell you, to wake up and have freezing rain or 21-degree weather in Galveston, Texas, and thinking you escaped it, the sunbirds, you didn't. Sorry about that. So.
Well, and they had those issues, what was it, a couple years ago with the infrastructure down that way. And I think that I didn't hear any reports. So I think that they held up this time around, which is
I had actually talked to someone in Plano, Texas, down there on a different tech matter. And we were talking weather and cold and I told him, hey, here's what's coming down the pike. And the gentleman just sort of freaked out on me, remembering the shutting down of power grids, oil, no water, livestock losses, big time. Says, no, just a couple days and we're okay. So I'm hoping that everyone has made it through okay and at least reap the benefits of some degree of moisture while you may not have liked the form of it.
Exactly. So, well, thank you so much, Greg, and watch Feedstuffs Daily and Beef Daily. And there's going to be a a weather report coming up there that Greg's going to be putting together for us here shortly. So if you want a little other look at those maps, that's a great place to do that. Thank you
Exactly.
so much, Greg. We look forward to catching up with you next month and getting an update, maybe a little farther out look into spring and maybe even early summer. So
Yes,
appreciate your
again,
time.
it's a slow demise of El Nino, but I think we ought to be in fairly good shape, broad brush, whole picture of things as we go forward deeper into spring and early summer.
Very good. Likewise, we appreciate all of you for tuning in and spending time with us today. A reminder that all Feedstuffs 365 segments are available at feedstuffs.com. We look forward to seeing you if you're going to be down in Atlanta at the IPPE show or at the NCBA show in Orlando. Stop by and say hi. Until next time for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead.